Politicians are failing to deliver climate justice. Lawyers and scientists could do it in court. Their case was first filed in May, but a court refused to hear it on several grounds, including questions over whether a UK court has any influence on the lives of people in other countries. Tricks said they are taking particular aim at fossil fuel projects in the pipeline, including a proposed coal mine in northwest England, which is under review, and the exploration of oil in the North Sea. We are ultimately being screwed over by the system, by this government, because of its funding of the climate crisis, Tricks said. It's actively financing extractivist projects that are contaminating our lands, our waters, and our air. A UK government spokesperson said, "We do not comment on ongoing legal proceedings." This kind of litigation is something the UK government, and many around the world, will have to get used to. In a separate case, a number of activists backed by a group called Paid to Pollute will take Johnson's administration to the High Court on December 8 to block state money flowing into new fossil fuel projects. The group points to billions of pounds that the UK government has spent on oil and gas subsidies since the Paris Agreement in 2015, which committed the world to try and limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, but preferably 1.5.
Globally, the number of climate change-related legal cases has more than doubled since 2015, according to the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the London School of Economics. Just over 800 cases were filed between 1986 and 2014, but more than 1,000 have been brought since the year the Paris Agreement was signed, according to its latest report published in July. We're seeing a lot of groups using the courts to try and advance climate action where there might be frustrations with the political processes, said Catherine Hyam, coordinator of the Climate Change Laws of the World program at the Grantham Research Institute. The cases were bringing a kind of interplay between court rulings and politics, she said. In a case brought by German youths to the country's constitutional court in April, for example, the court ruled that the government needed to boost its climate plans to fall in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement. That legal decision kicked off more political debate on climate, and the government ended up boosting its plans beyond the court's order. We see plaintiffs using the courts to try and advance climate action, but also as a tool to push the boundaries of political debate, she said. And major fossil fuel companies are being targeted by litigation too. A Dutch court in The Hague made a landmark ruling against oil giant Shell in May, ordering the company to slash its emissions by 45% by 2030. From 2019 levels, to be in line with the Paris Agreement. Shell is appealing the decision. That ruling could be truly transformative. It would be very hard for a company such as Shell to reduce its emissions by 45% without transitioning a good deal of its oil to renewable or low-emissions energy sources. Hyam says the decision could pave the way for similar court rulings against other major emitters. A similar case against French oil giant Total is being heard in France. While we can't say how other cases, like the one against Total, will ultimately conclude, there is a big possibility that cases will result in similar judgments against many other companies, or at least, that there will be many more actions building on the foundation that was provided by the Shell case. Science finally gets its say in court today. Courts are increasingly considering science in their climate-related rulings, according to Bill Hare, a senior scientist and CEO of the think tank Climate Analytics. Courts are looking at what the science is saying. They're given more and more weight to reports by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Hare said, referring to the landmark UN climate science report published every 6 to 7 years. The most recent one was published in August amid a wave of extreme weather events across the Northern Hemisphere. There is still a huge gap between what countries are putting forward in terms of emissions pledges and what's needed, according to the IPCC science, so that's another dimension to this that the courts will look at, Hare said. I think that's something that's going to be very testing on governments. We've seen that already in the last 12 to 24 months, and it can only grow. One example is a case by an Austrian activists group called All Rise against Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. The group is petitioning the International Criminal Court to hear the case, in which they say Bolsonaro's policies that allowed for the rapid deforestation of the Amazon released emissions that contributed to climate change, causing deaths and real losses and damages to people's livelihoods. Scientists were able to put an estimate on how much carbon dioxide and methane was emitted from those policies and found it accounted for around 1% of the world's global greenhouse gases each year. That's around the same as the UK's total emissions, they wrote in an expert submission to the case. They also found that the amount emitted would lead to more than 180,000 excess heat-related deaths globally before 2100. That's even if global emissions are cut substantially. Climate change kills people. And the politics of Bolsonaro not only increases emissions, they increases the intensity of heat waves, and that affects lives of people around the world, and, of course, locally, it's destroying livelihoods, said Friederich Otto from the Imperial College of London's Grantham Institute, who was among the scientists behind the written submission for the case. This kind of environmental destruction, on such a level, you should count as a crime against humanity because it destroys livelihoods on a large scale. Otto also leads the World Weather Attribution Project, which is a group of scientists who use modeling and data analysis to estimate just how much climate change contributed to an extreme weather event. This kind of science is useful in tort law cases, when a court needs to assess a civil wrong that has caused loss or damage. I think it's also important in the Bolsonaro example, because you can't hide behind generics anymore, Otto said. It's not some vague future generation that will suffer. It's concrete people here that are losing their livelihoods and concrete dollars that someone had to pay. The Bolsonaro case is truly unique in that litigating internationally on climate issues is difficult. There is no dedicated international court for climate crimes, for example, and even the ICC has its limitations. It can be constrained by its own power politics, and some countries have refused to cooperate in cases that implicate them.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.